So today we are talking about Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, The Myth of the Objective. This is a book that I found through like Twitter discourse, mostly from Silicon Valley adjacent tech Twitter. Last year, it was kind of all a buzz. It's actually, I think, 11 years old. This book came out in, I want to say 2015, but I think it's only become really it didn't come across my radar until about last year. And I'll tee this up by saying like the gambit, the provocation, the core provocation of why greatness cannot be planned is goals are overrated, and that actually we in trying to achieve progress or scientific breakthroughs by setting goals and measuring your success by attempting to measure what your efforts are as far as are they getting closer or farther away from the goal is wrong and counterproductive, and that is not actually does not even map on historically to how science has progressed. And then instead of setting goals and trying to seek goals, how scientific progress actually works and a better way to approach progress and discovery is to simply pursue what is most interesting. Everyone involved in quote unquote scientific progress or progress more generally, it would be better if everyone pursued what is interesting to them, discuss, and that each person will sort of fan out through the search space of all possible things and find these discoveries or these breakthroughs or these stepping stones that can be the thing that gets humanity forward to the next great thing. This idea has big, profound implications for machine learning, which is Ken Stanley's field of study. It has profound repercussions for science generally, but also culture in the arts, which the culture in the arts should have known this just intuitively. But I'm going to say that I think the culture and the arts have gotten wrapped up in the myth of the objective. And that might be one of the reasons that we have a kind of stuck culture. So anyway, there's a lot to explore there, but these were like the all of the reverberations that I've been thinking about since I've read this book a year ago. And also on a personal note, I realized that it like challenged me to rethink even my own uh, relationship to setting goals. And I even had to look inside and realize that there's an uncomfortable truth that I didn't immediately know how to put into practice, but I've been trying to start to put into practice, which is instead of pursuing just a goal, what if I pursued with the same tenacity, pursued things that I thought were interesting with the faith that that is going to lead me to a greater outcome than if I just picked goals. So anyway, that's my tee up for this. So
Yeah.
like Joe, I remember blathering about this, I think a couple months ago when it was still
Yeah.
fresh in my mind. And then you seem really interested in it. You've watched a couple videos of Ken Stanley today.
Yes. So when you initially explained it, I got the thrust. I got a lot of the details wrong, just in my memory of like what you had said. Like, but basically, the thrust of what I gathered was a guy trained AI using a data set of interests rather than a data set of data, basically, and which is kind of true. So really, the thing that the idea of the image picker, the idea of iterations, that part I didn't quite get, like when we were talking about it. So the concept of the pick breeder, where you choose, I and the thing that really unlocked all this for me is choosing any, whether you want to start from something random, whether you want to start from something that someone else has produced, whether you want to start from something AI generated. The idea is to move from images. The idea is to do whatever you want. The idea is to move from an image that you choose from a group of images to another image that you also choose from that same group of images. And depending on who you are as a person, you're going to choose a different thing as you go. And that I thought that, and then he compared the thing to the pick breeder plus audience voting, the sort of the top images from each catalog, and showing the way that and this is a neural network, right? You said they use
Yeah.
neural networks in this, right? So comparing the way that
Yep.
neural networks, when guided by consensus, produce essentially less interesting images than ones where they're guided by a selective process. So I feel like that's one of the things that I really resonated in, Keaton. And like, I've always had a really tricky relationship with goals because I understand their value and I like setting them. But I also know that my most successful, by my own terms, like most successful, productive uh, projects output has been either a goal set for me by someone else or like a provision given to me by somebody else, or has been me actively pushing against some kind of goal or end zone. And I also just know from the writing that like even within the frame of writing, when I say this is what's going to happen here, I've always resisted outlining because I'm like, when I say that this is going to happen here, there's some magic goes away, something disappears, and it's not that I think I'm like this creative wizard. It's that I know that I need to be free in the moment to be guided by something other than this is what needs to happen. And that when I do that, I produce vastly more interesting things than when I try to say, okay, at the end of the scene, they're going to kiss. What's actually way more productive is to say, I'm just going to put two people in a room and see how long it takes them to kiss or whatever, and be able to follow where that kind of goes. And that's the reason it makes better drama when I do that is because that's how people behave, is that that's what people do, is whether they have really honed that or not, or whether they have, and I think I'm almost coming to a point. Whether they've honed that or not, whether they've developed that
Yeah.
skill of following their interest, I think that is very natural to people. I think what is unnatural is sort of like the Moneyball technocratic tech bro Silicon Valley vibe, which is he compares it to just a straight search, right? Like this sort of concept of like if you were all of programming is based around the idea of an objective. Like that's all of machine learning is based on the idea of an objective. But if we know that that isn't how it's working, if we can reproduce what other part of the human brain within this, that I so the thing that I struggle to explain in goal oriented space, which is most space, right? This is why I don't like sports, is like I thrive and I'm a creative person and I thrive when I can sort of like take what you're asking me to do. Like I love when someone gives me the end zone of a project but not how to get there. Or I love when someone gives me
Yeah.
a task with no object other than the task itself because I try to find ways to turn that task towards something, right? And I feel like this is really captures so much of the things I like the best and things I want to do the best. And the other piece
Yes.
is just to this idea that like indeed, and you can correct my assumptions here. I was thinking, if indeed coding, AI, machine learning, if this stuff is really as profoundly objective based as I was given to understand in my 45 minutes of YouTube watching, then I feel like what this really is that both a feminine aspect, but also the gathering aspect to the hunter male aspect that has dominated, the internet because it's kind of literally baked into the code. But I'm wondering if I'm overstepping that.
No, no. I mean, it's so hard to overstep because I do think this is such a rich and deep insight that ties into so many things. I think it's similar to something like mimetic theory with Rene Girard. It's such a simple idea that seems almost too simple and too obvious, but then as you see it applied, it starts to have such explanatory power and it starts to link other things that are deep and profound insights to go, oh, well, that's also this, that's also this, that's also related to this. And that feeling can be like, that feeling of deep insight is so like, yeah, it's so exciting. And it's so funny. Like I've been sitting with this book for now, I think about a year now, and just starting to talk about it. I'm like, oh yeah. So I had never even thought of what you just said, which is that there's this is like a masculine feminine frame applies to this, that the hunter part, this sort of tracking an animal and with your gang and trying to kill the animal, or to even the idea of like weapons, like trying to aim and throw a spear or a bow and arrow or whatever, and how shot through human development is with that kind of gesture, like with the rocket or the yeah, going to the moon. Like That's deep into the idea of the beginning of AI when it was called cybernetics. We could talk a little bit about that, which is all about goal seeking and orienting, and it comes out of trying to have guided missiles. Like there is a goal. Are you moving toward the goal or are you moving away from the goal? And to try to get it to the goal, i.e., the kill,
Yeah.
versus gathering, like, well, where are the good berries? Where are the poisonous berries?
Which is
I have a bad vibe from that path over there. I don't know why, but I've got a good vibe from this one over here. Does go over here. And then like trusting that as is so in our culture that it's so easy to denigrate that. And yet that's so pervasive and is so useful. And when you are talking in art and cultural spaces, language like that, like, fuzzy language that kind of gets at the isness of something. But yeah, so it might help to define a couple things like pick breeder. So why does this guy get to write this book and make these claims? So Ken Stanley made an experiment called Pick Breeder, inspired by evolution. And the idea here is that let's take these two pictures. You could just pick one, and using them, that sort of narrows down your search space. So like, let me look at pictures that are more like this, but with some randomness added onto it. And the idea is that after doing this for a while, you start to pool yourself possibilities that Pick Breeder could generate, find things that look interesting. And what he found in this experiment is that with in some cases very few hops, people could discover these images that were really striking. Of images that sort of they're like standard canonical, like most interesting discoveries. But we have a thing that we have a skull, like a thing that I would, if you gave me a sticker, I go, oh, what's the skull about? A sunset, a car, a viper. Some of these are a bit more abstract, but the kill shot is, for me, other than the skull, is probably what's on the cover, which is the butterfly, which is a really interesting image just in and of itself, because there's something about it that does kind of clue me in that it is probably computer generated, but is actually aesthetically interesting. And those two things do not always go together. The idea that a lot of images that are generated with, say, Sora or any of these modern image generation tools where you give it a prompt and it makes you a butterfly, aren't as interesting or as beautiful as this butterfly, which, it must be said, was not set out. Pick Breeder was not set out to make a butterfly. And the person who discovered this, and this is like the key idea, didn't go in going, I'm trying to find a butterfly. It was just, I'm trying to find things that are interesting. And then somebody found something that looks like a butterfly and then started to go, oh, wait a second, I think I'm onto something here. These are pretty psychedelic. So there's a little bit of, like what you're saying, a bit of a magic eye trick. Like, so is it, so a couple of things just to throw out there. These things look like a butterfly or a dolphin or Jupiter or whatever, or a psychedelic bear. They are not in any way, like the algorithm was not made to represent bear, doesn't know anything about bears, but we do. And we found these things that look like objects in a very, in machine learning terms, in a very, very shallow search path. So anyway, that's the big idea of Pick Breeder. There's,
if
and I guess, go ahead.
I think that, so the part that I thought was really compelling, and I think it's interesting that because I feel like, because you're coming at it from like a coding and computer science angle, like you're focused on the fact that an algorithm produced the images. An algorithm didn't try to say make a skull. What the algorithm did was what the first slides show, which is here's some arches, here's some lines, and then a person picked just from that, and then from that they made it. And so someone, I don't know if the slide is in this deck, but they might have started. They didn't necessarily start from just arches though, because the interesting thing is that skull started from like a very convincing dish, because part of what is so fun to me about the site and what he is proving here is that I'm focused on the person, right? Like the reason it looks better than an AI generated image is because it's from an array of AI generated images from which a human being with taste selected their favorite and tagged it,
Yes.
right? It's the person who said, "Hey, this
Yes.
one's a skull," and he said there's a labeling option in the program. So people are so and that's really important because people can also start with those tagged images. So he was able to
Yes.
start with this one, which is the alien, and he was able to
Yes.
say,
So
"Hey,
somebody
yeah,
else found this alien face, which I think is accurately labeled. I mean, you could maybe see other things here. Again, it's somewhat abstract, but I think if I gave this to somebody, they go, "Oh, that's a cool alien or a cool frog," maybe.
Sarah said frog." Yeah,
Yeah. And then so Ken, the author of this, one of the co-authors of this book, or the paper, the original paper, um, was like, well, let me see if I can get a better alien. Like that was his objective when he started. Or let me play around and see if there's cooler, better alien faces here. And instead of an alien, after a couple of, and not many, like just a couple of iterations of breeding, he found a car, which is not what he set out to find, but was even more exciting for him. And that was a kind of his breakthrough moment of what was going on here. When he realized, again, this experiment started not to prove out the point that he writes in this book, but just as an experiment in image generation. And I should stress this is 10 years ago, which in AI terms is 100 years ago. So we didn't have things like Sora image generation, video generation. We didn't have ChatGPT yet, although I think the Transformer paper had. I don't even know if the Transformer paper had been written yet. I'd have to fact check that. But in making this and examining the sort of experiment they had, he realized something. Wait, we are finding these images not by searching explicitly for them, but by noticing when we are onto something. And then again, like you were saying, Joe, one of the key features of this was that you could start from somebody else's discovery and then go, well, what else is there? And oftentimes people would go like, well, I want to see if I can get even more alien faces or whatever, but then they just stumble on something else entirely that they don't predict. But then they nonetheless find interesting and save. A good intuition for this, if it wasn't, if it was not so, I mean, it is, but it's not sort of what it's doing, is to compare it to the infinite monkeys on infinite typewriters. Eventually, one of them will write the complete works of Shakespeare, right? Is to think about it in that term. So the algorithm is just infinite monkeys on infinite typewriters. And let's bound it and say, well, instead of every monkey is just writing one sheet of typed paper. So somewhere within there is the first page of the Constitution, of Declaration of Independence. What's interesting about the algorithm is not that it's generating the Constitution. It's just the Constitution's out there somewhere in that space. Like the algorithm really is that human beings presented with a random sampling of all of that entire space can go, that looks like English, or that maybe is not English, but it looks like it's got paragraphs. And you put those two together and you have something that maybe have paragraphness and English sort of ness together. And then somebody else might go, ooh, that's got sentence structures. So let me get that. And then maybe we never find the first page of the Declaration of Independence, but through that you might find something else entirely. You might find some ASCII art that paints a smiley face with with a typewriter, because that's in there. That's in the space of possibilities. You might find a page of poetry or something like that, because again, they're all exist out there in that infinite space. Another one is like games of chess you can think of. It's not it's not that this is an algorithm for building to play chess, but it's an algorithm for just generating states of the chessboard. And chess players might go, oh, that's interesting, but some of them would just be garbage. They'd be meaningless nonsense. So anyway, that's just to sort of set the table. That's what's going on here.
So and so that's kind of the intuitive part of this. What he's saying isn't that like having goals is bad. What he's saying is that the way we achieve truly massive like leaps forward, true innovation is through accidents. And they could be really well situated accidents, right? Because it's not that the guy who discovered penicillin wasn't a scientist. It's that he was a scientist setting out to do something else. The thing that was
Yes.
happening for him though was that he wasn't his whatever his goal was, he was attentive to the possibilities within the achievement of that goal, and that led to a great discovery,
Yes.
right? And so that's kind of the thing.
Yes.
So this is I feel like what he's it's hard because there's like the computer implications of this, like how do machines learn, which he demonstrates through like walking robots. There's a really great thing in one of his talks about like a maze and how he has an image of a maze. Can't find a good you can find like a sort of poor version of it that I can send you to pull up, and I think it will be worth.
Yeah. In fact, actually, I was gonna maybe I should have probably just bought the Kindle version of the book so I could pull it up on screen.
There we
But
go. Great.
here's one of this is in the book.
Yeah.
This is a very simple idea here, which is at the top to what he describes here is like, say you're trying to build a little AI to find how to solve a maze. And this is a very simple maze here. It's just one room and one exit, right? And so the solution's like very, very obvious. Now, you could, one way you could solve it that you might not think about as being a good way to solve it, but he's proven, or I think maybe somebody else proved this before him, is a great way to solve it, is instead of looking for the exit, um, you just get it to crash into the wall, and it finds ways to crash into the wall. That's its objective, is to find new ways to crash into the wall. So step one, well, here's one way. Step two, here's another way. Step three, here's another way. You just go straight. Well, what it can actually eventually find is the one way to not crash into the wall is to exit, right? So this isn't just not looking for the goal. This is explicitly looking for the opposite of the goal, but new ways to fail.
Yeah,
And
the way
in
he
finding
describes it
new
is
ways to
you're
fail,
looking for novelty. You're looking for and rewarding novelty because
yes,
through seeking novelty, you don't right. If I try to program a robot to not bump into walls, what I'm going to get is a
yes,
robot that's hyper fixated on walls.
yes,
If I train my robot to find new parts of the rooms, the robot will discover walls. Right? If the robot gets rewarded, if its goal is not don't do something or do something, if the goal is find every possible solution in this problem space, so find go stand or
yes,
fall or walk to every possible part of this space, it will discover the walls. You don't have to tell it about walls, and it doesn't have to learn what walls are through searching for novelty, through searching new expressions of whatever it can do inside this space. It will find the walls, and through finding the walls, find the objective more readily. I put in the chat, there's an
yes,
image that I really loved is because and this is like, for LinkedIn, this is for creative work. This is for,
yeah,
I just think this is beautiful because the idea and the way he describes it is, so if you want to teach a robot with a neural network, so it can learn, it can adapt how to get from the start to the finish. And you reward it based on proximity to the finish, right? How close can I get to getting finished?
yeah,
There's
like in XY real space, right?
yep, or
You
just
could measure this as
from
yeah,
any point on the map. And when they run just a traditional objective based network, where the mouse is right now, there's a lot of resources expended to there in order because that's
yes,
close. You're close to the finish.
yes,
From
yes,
our minds, from the way humans think, that's laughable because we know that isn't what we need. And when they use the kind of network that's searching novelty, what ends up happening, I don't even think it reached the finish, but it gets way farther down because it's bouncing off the walls and finding farther horizons, right? And it's just
yeah,
super, super clear and vivid because that's exactly how, there are memes about this. There's advice about this. There's an entire multi-million-dollar publishing industry telling writers, like, you don't know what you're working on till you're done. And even after that, you don't exactly
yes,
know. Right. And what
yeah,
we're trying to
yeah,
say is this, like, this is the thing that people are trying to say in
yes,
creative fields all the time is that, like, and like you said toward the beginning, like creative fields, because they've been moneyballed, now operate under the same sort of logic that like everyone operates under, which is that close to finish is better than very far away, but nearer to the end of the maze, And
yeah, Yeah.
It just this idea crops up like in every facet of my life. I think it's like a one of those things that happens on the personal level, like the organism, but also the organization. That like y- when you're goal oriented, you end up in that pocket. When you're not goal oriented enough, you end up not reaching the finish. And like I think, like you said, also like there's a that's kind of where the hunter gatherer thing came up for me is like I think it's a yin yang situation where like
Yes.
if you could introduce the goal in a way where novelty is also rewarded, um, I feel like you'd definitely get a robot that get to that finish line in one or two tries, you know? And
Yeah.
so
So the objective is when he says the myth of the objective, we know what objectives are in plain English. In machine learning, it's this specifically. The cost function is a way of measuring your objective. You have the objective to get to the finish. If you're moving in this direction, you are, according to the math, getting closer and closer to your objective. But you don't want to use that function. It would be better to just go, like in the case of novelty search, go, okay, this is new, and this is new, and this is new, and this is new, and this is new. Well, now I've exhausted this. This is no longer new. So let me try this. Okay, this is new, this is new, this is new, 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 new. Like eventually you're gonna exhaust all the novelty, and then you'll end up at the finish. And that is gets you in many cases closer. If it doesn't solve it, it'll get it closer. And if it does solve if both approaches eventually solve it, novelty search often gets you there faster.
and I think I just sent another image link because I feel like this part of my both the challenge and the enticement of this subject for me is that this is obvious, right? And I'm
Yes.
saying it's obvious through the use of this classic homespun piece of wisdom, which is something that we apply in every domain, right? And I think that there's a
Yes.
one of the things that is interesting about this is that like goal orientation and objective that objective setting and goal achievement has a place, like in this image obviously both these guys are digging for treasure, but I think that like sort of the deeper truth that he's talking about that sign here that we talk about is like you're trying to have how many founders, how many startups, how many things the story is like I thought I was going to do this but I ended up doing this, and what they're talking about is really this is about you don't know what's going to happen. What's important, right, is that like you accept that moving away from some objective doesn't mean losing the objective any more than that moving
Yes.
toward the objective means you're going to get the objective, right? And so part of the idea of this meme is obviously like, oh, don't give up. You just got to keep digging. But what they're talking about is really this is that like the achievement of any goal, right? Like, because I think the easy, obvious rejoinder to all of this is people achieve goals all the fucking time and they go through the whole maze. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the thing that machines cannot do. And that's the thing that no
Yeah.
machine can do. And that's the
Yeah.
reason they're
And that's
dangerous. And it's the reason they're fascists because it can't entertain possibilities, right? It can't entertain possibilities that veer away. I'm gonna loop back around and this is why I'm like, we gotta because I also read American Diner Goth, and I think that this helps me achieve sort of like a summary of because I think it's for the most part totally on the money, except for the fact that he's so hypercritical, which I'm just like,
yeah.
I just think that I think that there's an answer in this, which is that like, man, just because you don't get the anime doesn't mean they're not onto something, like just let them, right? The other obvious piece of homespun wisdom that I think this really brings to life is let them cook, like when someone is
Yes.
put
Yes.
your mouse in the bottom right corner of the maze, when someone's there and you're like, I don't understand where that person is, how they're going to be able to like get anywhere from there. This is an algorithmic way of saying that is that like and I think he talks about how this has a whole host of implications just for the idea of a search function that like
Yes.
we think that by letting Google take and digest all of the information and then let us search for it, that will somehow bring order to anything. And obviously we have found in no uncertain terms that's not the case at all. And
Yeah. Yeah.
part of what he's proposing is like the idea of search is flawed fundamentally because
Yes.
If you're trying to, if you want to, and not always, if you want to know what time a restaurant's open, search is great. But if you want to find good advice, if you want to find something that will take you to the next part of, your life, if you want to find something that captures your interest, searching for it's really hard. Rather, searching for it's really hard without being disingenuous. And so I feel
Yes.
like
Yeah.
the all the things that are the most, and this is just intuitive, all the things that shape you the most are things like, oh, this person gave me a guitar, this person did this, and that's
Yes.
like the obvious real life implication, and why I think the video you sent, I just feel like we got to say to people, you just watch that and then you can listen to this.
Yeah.
Really, the thing that was most fascinating to me is how rapidly it deteriorated because everyone in the audience was laughing and identifying with every part of this. Like the
Yes.
images when they're chosen by consensus are sort of blasé and without form, and they can't reach any kind of uh yeah, is that in here? That would
Yeah,
be,
I don't know if that's in this, paper,
yeah.
but, I'll say that's actually what it's saying is, so there was a very similar experiment from PickBreeder that was done, which was also launched to a website and was public. And instead of individuals just going off on their own and finding things that were interesting to them, and then breeding and finding things, and then saving and sharing their discoveries with everyone, the mechanism was okay. A For like a day or so, or at some interval, there was a set of images and all you could do is vote on what you found was interesting. So you still are using your interesting function, and then you take the consensus of that decision from everyone, and then that generates the next thing, and then you do with that. So instead of a bunch of individuals pursuing their own needs, and I have a de Tocqueville quote to wire in here, but instead of every individual sort of pursuing their own interests and then sharing, and then maybe that brings other people to your part of the map to go, oh, that is interesting, but let me take it in this direction. It's let's all vote, and then we'll see where we go. And what they produced were the images they found that were interesting were much less interesting than the pick breeder ones. They were abstract. A lot of them were just they stumble on circles or
It looked like
symmetrical
MRIs
shapes.
of an eye. Like all of them looked like different.
Yeah.
That was the thing that I found, it's like funny and weird, is that like it looks like a panopticon. It's just like a bunch of MRIs of people's eyeballs. And
I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
it feels so on the nose because it's like that this
Yes.
just someone in the audience literally goes, and this is why I hate committees. Thank you. And it's like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
No, I feel it so deeply. I feel it so deeply in my heart.
Yes.
This was so validating because I'm a long-standing, like, committees have never achieved anything of value because you can't achieve things of value without freedom to like say the wrong thing, right? Which is another way of saying you can't get through the maze without getting further away from the objective. And this is the logic that runs every creative space I've ever been in. I want to hear this to Tocqueville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So great quote, which I had to go find because it was ringing in my ear when I read it, which was this is from de Tocqueville. To force all men to march with the same step toward the same purpose, that is a human idea. To introduce an infinite variety in actions, but to combine them so that all these actions lead by 1,000 paths toward the accomplishment of a great design, that is a divine idea.
I mean, yeah, man. Like, well, because and I said it kind of like as a joke, but if what he's saying, that at the core of programming a machine is this idea of the
Yes.
objective, right? Then that helps to explain why we're culturally struggling with them and why fascism is on the rise. Because
Yes.
right, and this goes along, and rise and grind, like the sort of the font of what Silicon Valley is hasn't had an ability to wool gather because the language doesn't speak it, right? And it's obvious that the machines we use and control impact us, right? If you start speaking in French all day, pretty soon you're going to start thinking in French. And the same way, I imagine you can correct me,
Yes.
is true of programming and the framework you use get machines to do things. And that framework has been applied willy-nilly. We call it all kinds of things. It's financialization. It's, I said money balling,
Yes.
right? Like this is in every corner of the world. The concept that if we rig the numbers and make number go up, then like success
Yes.
is surely right around the corner. And that it's a religious myth, like the mythos of, like you said, the myth of the objective at the beginning. Like I think that that's what we're talking about, and the image that de Tocqueville's painting, people, all men marching in the same direction. Because it's not just about setting objectives; it's also about ranking objectives and ranking progress toward objectives, and because that means that it's a I said jokingly fascism, like that's the image he's painting is like everybody marching in the same direction toward this one thing. And that's kind of the promise of the Googles of the world, the idea of all machines at this point. The only thing that we can imagine that it could end in is like a singularity. There has to be some ultimate penetrative
Yes.
moment, that is like this is
Yeah.
the thing. And I like that what he's really stumbled on is in that language a rejoinder to that helps. But I think it has really big implications just for how people who program machines are able to think and express things within the machines, which I think has positive implications on the whole for people. Because I don't think it's
Yeah.
an accident. The sort of masculine, feminine, hunter gatherer, that framing of this, I don't think is too far off the more we talk about it and the more it seems like this is like it's so intuitive in creative field, it's so intuitive anything where the goal is to be interesting. And I think what's cool about it is seeing like I think the initial video was like a presentation to some business people, and I've been the guy in the room who's trying to advocate for like, let's hold off on naming this, or let's hold off on saying that this is what we're going to achieve yet.
Yes.
Let's follow the wind a little. Let's like see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's never been a single thing that I could bring that speaks like technocratic English into those spaces that they would click. And this will work. Like, I feel like I could show this to like the CEO of any organization and he'd be like, oh, and all I've ever
Yeah.
been able to do is take things from creative spaces and try to bring them into business. And there's sort of a suspicion. So I love that he's a computer scientist. I love that he's part of the priestly cast of 2026 who's saying something that I feel like I've been saying
Yeah.
and
This is
years old,
his. This is you're right, because this is fucking Martin Luther, like
Yes,
without a doubt. This is he works at AI, by the way,
who he
and
does.
left.
He's the guy who left.
He had worked for them. Yeah, he left. He's many people have been in and out, but he was there. His tenure was before the explosion of ChatGPT, and he had like mostly good things to say. There's another interview where he talks about this a little bit, and basically, actually, it was Sam Altman gave him good advice, which was like, hey, although ironic advice, which was this: it was like, Ken, you should really think about like what is the theme of your career. Because for me, Sam Altman, my theme is scale. Like I'm all about trying to get companies to scale things, like do things scale. And ChatGPT's success and OpenAI's success has been about scaling. It's about scaling up compute, bigger and bigger data sets, bigger and bigger data centers, processing power should get us closer and closer to AGI, or the transcendental object at the end of history, or whatever the fuck they're trying to do. That it will be done just purely by scale. And that is kind of exactly not what Ken's thing is. Also, the idea of having a theme for your
Yeah.
career as an objective would not be a Ken Stanley thing to do. But he did take it seriously. And then I think that was one of the things that led him to take a sabbatical to write this book, which he wrote at Santa Fe Institute, which is a whole different episode that we can talk
Yeah.
about. But okay, there's so many threads to pull on. I'm gonna do something maybe inadvisable, but I want to see how well this works, which is a crash course on machine learning with simple graphs, and we'll just see if this helps or not. One of the simplest things you could do with machine learning, as opposed to what we'll call like classical coding, like I'm going to write a code and it's got logic and if and statements, and it's like an instruction for a machine to do very simple calculations. Machine learning is about here's a bunch of data and we want to produce something that, given the right inputs, will create the right outputs. So we'll give you data of inputs to outputs. And machine learning is all about trying to find an algorithm, but really more like a formula or a set of weights and biases, which we'll get into, to then, given that set of input, give me the same output. So like the simplest way I think we can think about it is what's linear regression. In the book, Ken talks about stochastic gradient descent, which is has more moving parts, but is very similar to what I'm going to show you, which is just simple linear regression. So we'll make it simple. Say I work for, I've got a factory, and back in the day, and my employees can make a certain amount of widgets for a certain amount of hours. And I want to figure out what that rate is, or what that function is, which is probably pretty simple. But so we'll take it. Let's say your factory can produce, for every hour, the x-axis is hours, y number of widgets. So for 1 hour it's 1, for 2 hours it's 2, for 3 hours it's 3, 4 is 4. So this is a pretty simple function, which is f of x, like for how many hours you are going to get x. So for every hour you're going to get widget. That is the identity function. That is a 45-degree line on a 2D plane, on a Cartesian coordinate plane. Very, very simple, right? But you might go, okay, well, actually they produce, for 1 hour, they produce 2, or they produce basically 2 widgets per hour for every hour. Okay, so in that case, it's f of x equals 2x, right? Simple stuff. This can be formalized in like y equals mx plus b. M being your like the 2, the sort of line function, and b being a bias or an offset. So I'll show you what that might be, which is like, okay, so say like in a factory, your factory produces like 2 widgets per hour, but there's a setup cost and you have to pay it once a day. You just got to do it. And the setup cost is 1 hour. So at hour 1, you've produced 0 widgets. Hour 2, you produce 1. 3, you produce 4. And at 4, you produce 6. So basically you're 1 hour off from your rate because you've introduced this setup cost time. If I plot that, did I do this right? 0, 0, no, 0, 2, 4, 6. Okay. So you can see intuitively, it's the same line, but it's been offset. So that's what this here, the m of this equation, sets like your line, your rate, basically, which we'll set back to 2 because we know that's true. And then your bias is your offset. So you can move that until it lines up. Y equals 2x plus or minus 2. Is that right? Anyway, so we have fit our, which is actually, this line is not exactly right because at time 0, you're not at -2, you're at 0. This is linear regression. How a machine does this, that for us, we can kind of figure it out. We're like, oh, that looks like 2x. Like we have intuition. We could seen patterns before. How a machine does it, and this is a little more complicated. So there is no line that perfectly fits this. Let me reset this. It'll take a random guess, right? And then it'll iterate. And every iteration, it will try to figure out, am I closer or farther away from the ideal line, which would look more like this, by measuring how far off is this line from the other line, which is, that measurement is called a cost function. And that has like a big, scary formula for it, which is actually very simple. For all of the points that you measure, for all of your inputs to outputs that this line creates, measure their difference from the actual data set that you're measuring against. And then it's like sum of the square of that. So like you could also average it, but you get the idea. Like this is some n number off from where it should be. And every iteration, it tries to get that number, that cost function number, to go down. So like that worked. So that went down. That's going down, going down, going down, going down. Now, as it actually approaches it's getting closer and closer. It actually is taking smaller and smaller steps, which is like frustrating for a human to do. But a machine will do this, like several times a microsecond until it lands on it can get no better. So this right here is the objective function. This is the cost function. This is the number we're trying to go down. You can imagine data sets for which this doesn't help at all because they're curves, they're not lines. You might have data sets that look like shapes, so neither one fit. So there's different strategies for different inputs and outputs. But underneath the hood, it's basically this times a billion, right? You're trying to as you have a training set, you start kind of randomly and you try to move in one direction or another in a multi-billion parameter space, and then figure, did that get us closer or farther apart, or farther away from this sort of ideal? And the idea is that eventually you land in a place where it's like, well, if I go either direction, I can't really get any better. And in many cases, that works totally fine. But again, the intuition being that it does not work if you found yourself here, and or that's the local minima. You could get stuck here. Now you can do another training session where you go, well, let me start more randomly pointed in that direction and follow that. And then maybe it'll figure itself out. Was that helpful?
I think it's super helpful. I'm like, so a number of things. Okay. First of all, I think this helps clarify. I feel like you explained both of these things to me simultaneously over the phone. And that's the bottle of champagne on our prow. And so this part of it, like in terms of machine, like how it applies to machine learning, essentially being, because when I see those dots, what I'm looking at is stepping stones, right? And what he's talking about is instead of, right, if you think about applying the idea of machine learning, say, to the development of um, antibiotics, then
Mm,
and then tried to apply some kind of rule, because to apply, so imagine the blue dots are events and the red line is a rule, right? So
yes.
so what we're talking about is real life, does real life more resemble a red line, or does it more resemble the blue dots? And this can be in anything. It could be in whether, we're talking about scientific progress, we're talking about artistic progress, we're talking about business progress. There's a big time compromise that's happening, especially when you've got now there's a stepping stone up there at 20, and a creative generative person looks at the stepping stone up at 20 and is like, what the heck is going on there? Let's dig in. And that is the through line of every podcast that anyone has ever listened to, or any story, is someone turning their attention to, oh, what's that thing over there? And so I feel like that's the thing about this that I find so inspiring and so like motivating, is that so much of like the advice I've internalized and received about how to achieve something, especially and primarily the advice that I rebel against most powerfully, is really advice about this line, and feeling intuitively like the way to progress up the line is something more like bumping between blue, like, pinballing between some blue dots than
Yeah.
climbing up a steady incline. And I think everybody knows this to a degree. And I think that it really is a sort of yin yang tension in just existence, is like that. And that someone's saying to people who are teaching machines, like, this is another thing that happens. It is the more like Hamlet's ship lost in a storm kind of a thing that really sets about like transformative change. Is, I guess that's a required text now too, in the full Uncut Hamlet. I don't think this is any of the movies. He goes away for a little bit, and then his ship gets caught in a storm, and they get like kidnapped by pirates. I'm getting a lot of details wrong, but he comes back and he basically is like, you can't really know what's going to happen if
Yeah.
you have something you need to take care of, like killing your uncle. You just got to do it. You know, right? Like the readiness is all. Like you just got to
Yeah.
go for it. And I feel like that's like a obviously now what 450 almost 500-year-old thing that's trying to get at that, like the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. Like that we don't progress primarily on steady curves like this. We progress primarily on you know on the data set and things.
Yes. Yeah, I threw sort of, to make the argument, I threw one data point way out of this line, and it's like, okay, now that means that like it produced the same linear function at the end to fit, because it's still the line of best fit. It means that permanently there's now the cost function will have a new floor, because it'll never be able to incorporate this. Okay, well, that's boring. Um, Now, what is this? Like, what is this one? Like, what do we do with this, right? This happens all the time. So if you think about like, well, like, what are we even achieving with with making a cost function like this. You could imagine one of the things you might want to do is go like, all right, we are going to do a customer service bot. Or even before customer service bots, just like here's customer service policy for when people call in about their product being broken. And most of these inputs to outputs are going to be pretty linear. Customer says they're experiencing this, you do this. They have this, you do this. Like, here the policy. We're going to cover the whole space of possible things that a user might need to do, and we're going to have a policy for that, which then once you have that means you can automate it, like especially now with where AI and voice chat and all that is. And maybe you don't even write the policy anymore. You just go from customer satisfaction, like you have a training of all the calls and all of the things that were ever done, and you measure customer satisfaction at the end, and then you get some kind of machine learning model that is the great customer service rep. And it fits this line, right? Like condense that down to sort of one variable and it looks like this. But what is going on with the outlier? What are we supposed to do with the outlier? How are we supposed to fit this in? And like, this is a deep, deep idea. This is the black swan, right?
Yeah.
So like everything seems to work until you get one thing that does not work with that, but is invariably going to be there. This could be like in the customer service context, like, hey, my right after I divorced my husband, he got into a car accident and died, or he got into a car accident, he's brain dead, and I need to get to his account. I'm no longer his wife, but I'm sort of his wife now. So like, you're like, well, I can't give it to you because you're not his wife. It's like, but you are, but you're not. And like these kinds of events where somebody has to go, oh, I'm going to make an exception and follow the spirit of the policy, not the letter of the policy, because this is and maybe this is a once in a lifetime thing that's ever going to happen. We have to be able to adapt to that customer. And if we don't, and we go, well, we can't, it's too expensive to adapt to that customer or to that need or whatever, we just got to throw it out and say, well, fuck it, some eggs are going to get broken in the process. That's the fascism of the line, right? Say, hey, you don't fit the plan, you're out. You're just sorry. You can't get in line. Not even because it's more expensive, but just because it doesn't fit the model. Like
talking about, I think the example is really good. What occurred to me is, okay, imagine a multiplicity of domains, right? So this is a chart for the grosses of vampire movies. It's a chart for the grosses. I mean, imagine the lines are all different, like movies about the blues, and it's a chart for the grosses of movies about Black people. And then your dot way up there is sinners, right? And so much of creative art and business art is trying to figure out how to elevate things up to that level. And I think what you had said about like, try to sum up what I was just saying, which is the sinners example is a little silly, but it's also kind of the point, and I think it illustrates it well, is that like outsized success or unexpected success often doesn't come from, and I think this is well known, that like from looking at a single chart or like even from looking at multiple charts, it comes from the human mind being able to look at the different domains of those charts and consider them swappable, like to be able to look at both what is, in the example of Sinners, what makes a satisfying horror film, what makes a compelling personal story, like whatever, like looking at the different domains of what it is you're trying to achieve and treating them as sort of equals and being able to fluidly move between them, and that solving problems, like to your point, there's all kinds of workarounds to draw a curve, to draw an apple, to draw a star, to do whatever you have to do within that space of doing a line, to sort of analogize this. But none of them are actually doing it, right? Like they're all these approximations. They're all these sort of like smaller shapes. And there's a thing that AI can't do that we try to name that people can do. And what it is like, consider outside the domain, right? Like that stepping stones aren't just about, this is the progress in my field. What geniuses do is be like, this is a stepping stone here, and this one is over from the world of dance or whatever. I'm going to bring that one into my thing. And this is one is this, and each of these art forms is in this particular context, or whatever. And I'm going to take all of that, all of those little stepping stones, and I'm going to put them all sort of together to get to the thing I'm trying to get to. The other thing I'm trying to figure out, or the other way I went with this, because I keep thinking in terms of application, like what does this mean? Because it does. I think it does mean something. I mean, it just it demonstrates something, and it can help. I feel like sharpen approaches. But one thought that have you heard of Banana Ball? Do you know like the Savannah Bananas um,
Yes,
baseball
yes.
league, right? So another thing that the thing that I think is interesting is that's obviously a very rule bound thing, but one of the compacts, right? So like baseball, put things on the line, viewership goes down, right? If we're looking at a if you're looking at baseball, like Americans watching baseball, but there's Savannah Bananas, which is sort of the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball. Viewership for them goes up. I entered a lottery to get the chance to buy tickets to see them here in Milwaukee. And I didn't even make the cut of that. And they were just like, good luck till next year. And there's also like they have set up their own after fan market, right? But what I was thinking about looking at that is like that's all this is also very interesting because this is innovative. It's everything about it is still baseball with different elements, right? Other things brought in that are not from the world of baseball at all, as well as altering the rules of baseball to fit something else, which is like the curve of audience. It's only 2 hours long. It's one of the rules. The game's just over at 2 hours. There's no innings. It's just done. 2 hours and then over the scores are done, right? That means something to the kinds of people who would watch baseball traditionally. As someone who's
Yes.
taken my kid to a baseball game and had him fall asleep in my arms between from the sixth inning on, s- there's a it's like there's a kind of innovation which is to set up a new set of is to essentially look at the line and say let's just put data sets in a new spot, and so we just draw a whole new line and then that can just run, right? And that's sort of like a that's a real uh that's another kind of innovation, which is the iterative thing, but it's also, I think, again, it's not just about the stepping stones of my field or the stepping stones of my thing. This is how it gets related to that interest piece. Is it's like the real, true, exciting, hot market innovations can come when you are able to like across a bunch of different fields and a bunch of different stepping stones in the same time. Because then you're a
Yeah.
bunch of different stepping stones in the same time. Because then
Yeah.
you're doing something.
I did want to talk about like the there being a true diversity, like diversity of interests, diversity of perspectives, and diversity of like behavior, even like what like true individual diversity of like this thing is interesting to me, and I'm going to go over there. Like for artists and for creatives and for people for whom this may not be news at all. And in fact, having this kind of rigorous mathematized like proof of it is like might seem like, yeah, I just intuitively understood that. I've been saying this my whole life. For those people, I would say like, well, like what can we do? What can we offer? Because and now that I think that within tech Twitter, there has been all this talk about taste and developing taste, and that now that coding is solved, quote unquote, um, that we are going. What was really going to matter is agency, which is this broadly sort of vaguely defined term, and an even more vaguely defined term, taste. And that this book is actually about agency and taste. Agency is your ability to pursue what you find interesting, and finding something interesting is taste, right? And so I would I'm going to assert that. I think that that's maybe somewhat obvious, but then this is my bone to pick with like, so there's the ball problem of the arts and the sort of Marvel movieification of the arts. And I think just generally that this also happened in the aughts and tens with internet culture, that kind of any beginning of a like larval stage of a subculture seem to get noticed and talked about, and then also almost like moved through all the stages of development so quickly in whatever direction it seemed vaguely pointed to when it entered consciousness, instead of letting it sort of develop more or less on the margins. It was like, well, what's that? And there was within music, there was a kind of, in the early tens, like a series of like blank punks, like Aqua Punk or I forget. It got to a point where it was like it was like just shooting down these micro trends or sort of making fun of them before they ever could like emerge into a new thing. Because it was like the beginning of an idea. It was somewhat novel, maybe it was interesting, maybe it was not. That just kind of ran through the cycle of let's notice it, tag it, and ruin it seemingly so quickly. And I feel like that has to do with like almost like this detection of, oh, is I feel like the Marvel movieification, the moneyballing of art is there's if there's interest towards something and there's a clicks or money or any of those, then the number is something in the system is noticing number going up. It's like attention, the Eye of Sauron goes to that thing, puts money or puts more attention or more ink spilled on thing, and then it runs, it's over before it even starts.
And
And I think we
that's
saw,
the corner. That's the corner of the maze next to the finish line.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
really easy to say number go up because that gets you really close. But the thing that's like always true is that what breaks through, what like means something, whether it's in and I keep coming back to art because I just that's what I'm thinking about. But I also like this works in I feel like this applies personally. Trying to get at like when thinking about how you can talk about art away from this machinified perspective, which is that this must have an objective and my role is to judge whether it failed or met that objective. Maybe really the easiest way to think about it is you just have to be able to juggle a whole lot of objectives at once or accept that the objectives aren't the important part, you know?
Um, and but the thing is, like, we have that ability. We have a whole half of our brain dedicated to problems like that, of judgment and kind of getting at the isness or the essence of something that could never fully be formalized or known, but can be recognized. Like, and I think that what I was going to say is like, I know that, and I've known that for a long time, but it's like interestingness, like in this frame, the Ken Stanley frame is like one in terms of the computer program of machine learning. His approach to interestingness is to reduce that to novelty, which is an easier thing to define and to measure. But interestingness is more than novelty. It may be meaningfulness. Like, well, that's not necessarily new, but that's meaningful to me. So I may have seen this thing before, but I'm still find it interesting and want to note that because it's another example of something that I find deeply meaningful. That's also interesting, even if it's not novel. And so interestingness as like I think it kind of rejects being a magnitude or even like you can't reduce that to like a scalar direction or a vector. You have to go like, interestingness, like vaguely it's pointed in that direction or this direction, but it is this multi-dimensional multi like contextual thing that and very much having to do with your experience and your individuality and then or a community's experience and their individual, like it can zoom out to like what is interesting to a culture might be a question that can be asked and answered somewhat. But yeah, it is to say like this can be done. We're not totally lost. We can do this, but we lose what we lose is the security of formalizing of the letter of the law of the formal mathematics of something, because then we can never really take our hands off of it and let the machine just run, which is kind of the argument here is like don't ever take your hands off the machine, put
Right.
your hands on the machine, like drive the machine, like you be the decider,
But
and then we'll be okay.
that is the central fantasy of contemporary life is to set it and forget it.
Yes,
It is
yeah.
everything. It's every YouTube video, every piece of advice you get, every conversation you have at work is how do we make this something we don't have to worry about anymore?